through excellent. Amy, thanks very much for recording this. Thank you everyone for joining. We have a few, for those of you that have not joined our motley crew before, I have a few opening statements, and then I'll run into a bit of an introduction, after which I'll ask, for the benefit of those guests joining us today, I'll ask that everyone just do a quick round table of, your name and what you do for fun, that is to say work. Good morning and welcome. I'm Adam Block, Chair of the Needham Council of Economic Advisors. This open meeting of the Council of Economic Advisors is being conducted remotely, consistent with current state regulations, and is being recorded. Public access to this meeting does not ensure that there will be public participation unless required by law. This particular meeting, though is accessible to the public, is not enabling public participation. So those participating in the discussion today will be those that are that we see in front of us on this Zoom. First, we'll confirm that all members of this subcommittee are present. When I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Glenn?
Here.
Rick?
Here.
Tina?
Here.
Bob? Bob Henschel? You're muted.
Here.
Very good. Mike Wilcox?
Here.
Virginia?
Here.
Lise?
Here.
And Adam Eisner?
Here.
And Amy, is there anyone else that we expect from our council?
No.
Okay, very good. I'd also like to introduce everyone to our Economic Development Manager, Amy Helson. For others participating in the meeting, please also be aware that others may be able to see you. Anything you share or state will be a matter of public record. All supporting materials for this meeting, including the agenda, are available on the town's website at needhamma.gov, unless otherwise noted. The ground rules for this meeting are designed to allow for an accurate public record. I'll introduce our speakers, and as you do speak, if you could, particularly for the first time, if you could say your name. This is Adam Block, and then you can continue with what you were going to say, so that way we can ascribe the right comment to the right people. And then this will be a panel discussion, and it'll be, given this crew and this subject, it'll be very participatory among all of us. The purpose of our discussion today is to talk about the retail activity in Needham. With us to lead our panel are Adam Convisor, who's one of the founding principals with Convisor Property Group, which is a commercial residential brokerage that services urban and suburban markets. We also have with us one of the principals at Linear Retail, Joel Cadis, and Linear Retail is also an urban suburban market focused real estate company that owns a sizable portfolio. As well, we have with us Gary Simon, who, like Adam Convisor, well, Adam currently is a resident of Needham. Gary's family has here with us in Needham, and I understand that Gary is also a long-standing Needham Rockets fan. We're grateful, Gary. And Gary is a principal at Copley Investments, which is a real estate company. It too is focused in retail and has a significant portfolio properties, both in the urban market in Back Bay, Copley, and in Boston, as well as in suburban markets, including Belmont, Needham, especially Wellesley, and other markets that we'll talk about. So, gentlemen, we're grateful for you all taking some time to be with us this morning. We look forward to this panel. Before we jump into the content, I'll introduce myself briefly. I mentioned that I'm chair of this motley crew. I'm also in real estate. My practice is predominantly residential. I do some commercial, but I'm certainly not a threat to either of the Adams. But it's funny that all Adams on this call all happen to be in real estate in some form. I'll pass this next on to Glenn to introduce yourself.
Hi, Glenn Camerano. My family runs Muzzy Motors, Ford and Chevrolet, and the car wash. We've been here a long time.
Thank you. Rick.
Hi, Rick Putfrush, Needham resident and principal at Fulcrum Real Estate Partners. We invest in commercial real estate.
And special shout out to you, Rick, and thank you very much for organizing and helping to organize our panel this morning. We're grateful for your effort and for your action to make this happen today. Thank you very much, Rick. Bob.
Hi, I'm Bob Henschel. I am a Needham resident and also work for Petrini Corporation, which is a local landlord and developer, primarily on the office and multifamily and single family side, but we have a small component of retail in Needham.
Thank you very much. Tina.
Morning, I'm Tina Burgos. I live in Needham and I own Covet and Lou on Great Plain Avenue, which is a retail shop.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Lise.
I'm Lise Elcock, a 30-year Needham resident. I'm the membership director of the Newton Needham Regional Chamber and a member of Amy's Subcommittee on Retail for the Council of Economic Advisory.
Excellent. Virginia. Virginia, you're muted. I apologize. We'll try that again.
Apologize. I'm on my iPhone today, which I don't usually do. Needham resident, over 30 years, and I spent my career in the commercial real estate investment world on the debt and equity side. And I recently retired, and I'm also part of the small business subcommittee that's been mentioned before for CEA.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Mike. Mike Wilcox, you are muted. There we go.
Yeah, sorry. Couldn't find the little knob there. Mike Wilcox, Bullfinch Companies, Director of Leasing. I've worked in Needham for about 20 years, so I'm pretty familiar with the business district. And as a company, we have not a majority of our holdings, but there's some portion of them that are in retail, mostly Wellesley, Concord, Coolidge Corner, and so I do some leasing myself, but as I said, it's a lesser part of what we do, but it's also more work than some of the other things I do because retail, of course, has its unique challenges. So thank you.
Adam Meisner.
You almost got me, Adam. Adam Meisner of 128 CRE, been a Needham resident for about 4 years now. Focus really on the office and industrial investment sales and leasing in the general area here as well. And when we do have retail stuff, we tend to send it over to people like Adam as the experts in their field. So.
Very good. Again, thank you all for being here. This is really a couple of committees of the Council of Economic Advisors, these subcommittees, including the Small Business Subcommittee, as well as our district-focused subcommittee. One obviously focuses with activity happening specifically, with small business, and the other looks at different districts within the entire zoning map, I guess, of Needham, looking for opportunities for growth. In fact, that's the one common element between the two subcommittees, is they both look at growth in different areas. Now, we found ourselves, like many towns across the country, during the pandemic, with substantial challenges. And the result of those challenges are several empty storefronts in our downtown and other parts, in particular with retail. Office seems to have survived in a different way, and yet we still do have some very busy downtown activity and other retail activity across Needham. And yet it's a perfect opportunity for us to explore what opportunities and what our challenges are ahead as we recover through the pandemic. What we'd like to talk about today is to look at the trends in retail, what's happening perhaps on a national and regional level, and a local level as well. What was happening before the pandemic and what's happening post-pandemic. What are the trends that we see emerging? We'll talk about our competitiveness, what markets we see ourselves competing with locally, what our competitive advantages are and what our competitive disadvantages are. We'll also take a look at and understand the market locally in a couple of different geographical areas, because we do have the predominant retail area of the center of town, but it extends all the way to the end of Lower Chestnut Street, near where I happen to live. And then we also have Needham Heights around West Street, from Trader Joe's all the way to the Shell station and the post office. And then farther along Highland Avenue towards the border of Newton rather. And there are a couple of other retail pockets in town. So we'll talk a little bit perhaps about some of those differences. And again, we'll talk about the opportunities and challenges that we see in front of us. And what's especially critical emanating from this group, are perhaps some lessons learned either through the pandemic or before, that can improve and inform our regulatory environment to make business happen here in perhaps an easier way. So we're looking for any constructive criticism that we can use to help our retail sector going forward. So with that, let's talk a little bit about our trends. And maybe I'll start with Adam Conviser. Adam, what are you hearing are trends at the national level, trends happening in retail on the regional level, and what trends do you see happening now with at the local level?
Sure. I mean, I think let's start with sort of the national level. Obviously, you see big box retail being hurt by the online Amazons of the world. Obviously, the Amazons and the online retailers have done quite well in the pandemic. However, on a micro level, a lot of them don't make money landing product to you online. They want you to get in the stores. So you see one of the big trends you'll see is like buy online, pick up in the store. That's really what these retailers want you to do. And I think you're going to see that trend continue because Amazon and the other online retailers, they're not making money online. It's very expensive to acquire customers. It's expensive to deliver to your home. It's expensive to cover returns. So all of these guys need brick and mortar. But you hear the big thing is the last mile, right? Last mile delivery. So that's sort of big, large trends. I think a lot of retailers, obviously you see restaurants have been very hurt in the pandemic. And but a lot of them have come out stronger, right? They've figured out how to operate. They've changed their footprint. Drive-throughs are huge. But you've obviously seen the trend where the suburbs have prevailed and done a lot better than our our urban core and our financial district and the downtowns. And I see this as a trend that was happening anyways. And you're going to see sort of change in, Adam Meister can speak to this, but a change in how people work, right? And I'm sure Joel can speak to this as well, where you're going to have a hybrid model of the way people work. I see a strengthening of the downtowns, of the Needhams, the Brooklines, the Lexingtons. I see these little downtowns becoming stronger because people are going to be working more and more from a hybrid model. They're going to be home more. Our downtown communities are really important. Shopping local, last mile delivery. These things are becoming, shopping local. These things are becoming more important for us. But it's harder and harder for these smaller retailers to compete, obviously, with private equity and larger firms. I think that one of the things you can do in the downtowns is to encourage more density. You see, one of the trends you see in all these downtowns is the outdoor seating, right? We didn't have a lot of these parklets before, and now you see it everywhere, and it provides it enlivens the street front. It allows for people to get together. It allows for activating storefronts and creates a much livelier downtown. I think in some of these instances, though, you've seen, like, you go drive Beacon Street in Brookline, you'd think that they pulled out building permits for some of these things because they've got electric and plumbing to some of these parklets in the street. I think you're going to see the downtowns cracking down on a lot of that, but you're also going to see a lot of encouragement because it does liven up the downtowns. I think taxes, going up in the downtowns hurt these retailers. The line item, and Joel could speak to this as well, but the line item for taxes is almost as much as some of the base rent. So it becomes problematic. But what you saw before, you saw trends in fitness. That was hurt during the pandemic, but I think we'll see that start to come back a little bit. People want to get out. They want to have their sense of community. You see a lot of restaurants changing their menus, becoming really good at delivery, becoming really good at online ordering, touchless ordering. And so I think a lot of stuff has been accelerated. The silver lining in the pandemic is people become much more efficient. They learn how to operate they learn how to operate differently. But I think a lot of these trends were going on anyways. But I see a huge strength in our downtowns and our neighborhoods, and I see those trends continuing.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, please, Rick.
Adam, how do you see, or do you see a benefit in adding vertical residential over some of the opportunities that we have, like on Great Plain Avenue, where we have single-story retail, being able to add apartments and things like that in the downtown area? Is that an opportunity?
I always go back to this one that I talk about in Brookline all the time. There's a huge parking lot behind the CVS in Brookline. It's called the Center Street lot, and it's a lot that's always full. And one of the big problems these downtowns have, and Brookline has it in particular, is there's no daytime pop. Everyone thinks Coolidge Corner is this great trade area, but there's no daytime population there. And so that makes it hard for retailers to operate, or especially a lot of restaurants to operate too. And I think that having that density in the downtown, whether it's residential or commercial, obviously increases the tax base and puts more bodies in the downtown, helps the retailers, and activates the storefront. So I think, the biggest thing you could probably do in a lot of these downtowns is provide incentive for developers to have real vertical development in the core. And obviously Needham's got a commuter rail, right? So it's a natural. Same with Coolidge Corner, it's a natural. I mean, to me in Coolidge Corner, there should be a medical building and a residential mid-rise on that lot. Needham is not going to do the same thing, but Needham could have more density in the downtown. And whether it's empty nesters that want to move out of their homes, I've been a Needham resident for 17 years. We do a fair amount of leasing, retail leasing in Needham, but most of our leasing is out of Needham. But I think having a lot of these, and a lot of people are selling their homes, looking for a place to go. They want to downsize. It'd be nice to have, Wellesley's done a good job with it as well. But it'd be nice to have some more residential base. And to me, it'd be nice to have some real office, especially now that there's going to be some hybrid working or working from the suburbs. I think more people are going to want to work from the suburbs. They've already noticed that the work-life balance is better. I mean, I don't want to work out of my home. That's why I'm in my car this morning, but just kidding. But I think with the work-life balance, it'd be nice to have alternatives in some of these downtowns. Obviously, the N2 corridor has a lot of office, so Needham does not struggle for office space, but having it in the core would be nice as well. You know, it's more people walking during the day, more activity with the restaurants and the retailers. And that's my 2 cents.
Densities,
Thank you.
densities, you know, a critical factor, and it's a subject that we've discussed at some of the subcommittees. You know, how do we boost density? What's the impact that can have? And it seems to be a critical element that we need to help restore our downtowns. I'd like to turn to Joel. And Joel, what do you see as the trends nationally, regionally, and at our hyper-local level?
Yeah, I agree with a lot of things that Adam said. I think that COVID, while devastating to many and horrible and all the adjectives that are appropriate, it looks to be a temporary phenomenon for the most part. So I think it's really more about the online phenomenon and the increasing shift of consumers to have comfort and to rely increasingly online. And so I think everything really flows through that challenge for towns like Needham. And so I think you see a lot of acceleration. It feels like COVID maybe accelerated online shopping, maybe 5 or 10 years faster than things would have happened. My 88-year-old mother now orders online, and, I had to convince her to take an iPad from me 2 years ago. So, I think that's just with an astonishing speed. That's really the story, not so much COVID. So I think that if I was talking to the town of Needham, I would say, first of all, are you committed to your downtown? And do you believe that downtown retail is, an incredibly essential component of the viability of Needham? Newton, I live in Newton, so we have 13 villages, and I think that most people feel like that's what is essential to the quality of life in Newton. And I think if you can get people to rally around that point, maybe it's an obvious point, but not always when you talk to people, then I think the town needs to do things that can contribute. I'm veering a little bit off of your question, Adam. I'm going to get back to it in a moment, but I think that the town could serve itself well if it responded to the challenge of the online phenomenon. So I think if you're a retailer and your items can be purchased online, then the bricks and mortar component is going to really struggle. You integrate for sure, and omni-channel shopping. Forgive me for the helicopter overhead. The omni-channel selling that retailers need to do to survive today can and should include bricks and mortar. But I think that if you can't address the reality of the online sort of tectonic shift, then and really my answer to your question revolves around this point. That's the lens that I'm focusing on now. So if you can't address the online convenience, then I think that you're going to suffer badly. So any retailer who I think COVID extinguished or really harmed or forced recapitalization of retailers, but I'm going to argue that the lens is online and not so much COVID. And I think that there are a lot of steps. I think really the discussion for Needham and all these towns, and that I've had with Wellesley and Newton, et cetera, is what can towns do to address this phenomenon that's clearly here to stay of online sales. So, I mean, I'm happy to drill down on specific retail categories and who's won and who's lost and why. But I think that's the overall lens that, if I was the town of Needham, I would want to focus on to commit and really protect the bricks and mortar, which for me is the heart and soul of a town, which contributes towards tax base and residential values and quality of life, et cetera. So for me, the conversation really is, how does one address the online challenge and help create this robust bricks and mortar downtown retail environment.
But you could be over retail too. I mean, it's not like if you have 20 available spaces, you're going to fill all of them because you may be over retailed. I mean, you may have to come up with creative ideas to take some of these vacant spaces and do other things with them. Just because you want to fill it doesn't mean you're going to fill the space. And maybe the exercise is looking at it differently. If you create density, you may create more demand for retailers to come down because it's going to be more people, but you also could put, potentially some types of office or service spaces in some of these retail that also create activity.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. And I think that you're seeing, as you know, you're seeing in retail, really very untraditional retail. Medical is embracing retail. You see hospitals trying to be more convenient to their customers, so to speak, by taking on retail spaces. There's all sorts of uses of traditional retail space. And for me, vibrancy is activity and connection with the residents of Needham. So Needham has a lot going for it, like Newton does. You've got the density and the wealth, and retailers and users of bricks and mortar thrive off of density and wealth. I mean, that's the key fundamental. It's not just wealth, it's density. So, and I agree with Adam 100% that by creating more density, especially if you've got transportation hubs to leverage off that as well, I think that's absolutely a great idea. But, I've had conversations with Wellesley selectmen where, they've talked about making liquor licenses much easier. I mean, those are the types of conversations that, I would really urge towns like Needham to address to preserve and enhance the vitality of the retail areas. Address the commitment and then make changes to commit.
I think start using that as a goal, or a value, I should say, and driving policy around that makes a ton of sense. And
yeah.
And to Adam Convisor, one of the things that we've already experienced, and I know this just by being on the planning board, that and Amy's talked about this with our group before as well, that the Art Emporium, a space in the downtown on Chestnut Street, near the kind of the bowling area, which is a sizable space. I think it's close to 17. It's a little over 1,700 square feet. Was like an art store to pick up painting supplies and things like that for those that aren't familiar with it. And it's now become an orthodontist's office. So it will undergo a substantial change. You're talking about using retail space in creative ways. And clearly the market will also determine what happens based on, supply and demand. And speaking about that market and so on, I'd like to ask Gary to chime in here. Gary, what trends are you seeing, with your own properties in both urban and suburban markets?
Well, thanks for having me, Adam. I guess the first thing I'd like to say is, at least in terms of my portfolio, probably my Needham properties are doing as well as any of my properties in my portfolio, which was surprising and great. And it sort of is pushing me towards the thought that, as retail as the country is in general, there's always going to be a demand for convenient stores local, that you don't have to go far. Of course, that's going to depend on adequate parking. I'll pick on Belmont Center for a minute. I just sold my property in Belmont Center, and I've been completely frustrated with it because they had two municipal parking lots, and the town in their wisdom decided to build a firehouse in one of them, ruining about 60 spaces. Parking is the lifeblood of retail. And if people can't go with a reasonable expectation of getting a parking spot to shop, they're simply going to avoid the area. So that's number one. my thing, I don't really have, I only have one empty storefront right now in Needham. But in the earlier conversation we had, one of the issues with Needham, it's not unique to Needham, but I'll pick on Needham, is that it's simply too regulated. There needs to be safe harbor provisions whereby a prospective tenant user, whether it's a restaurant or even something like a dentist that wants to go into a storefront, can basically go in by right as long as they meet certain minimum requirements. And now I want to circle back to parking. Of course, you want as much parking as possible in a downtown area, but to require everybody that doesn't meet a stringent parking requirement, which frankly most don't, that requires them to go in front of the planning board is again, to a prospective tenant, it potentially is a non-starter. You got to hire an attorney, you got to spend money. You don't even know if you're going to get the space. You got to deal with your landlord who doesn't want to give you, 3 months to go and chase a permit. And it's a big problem. And it's been a big problem in Needham I've been doing this for 40 years. It's been a big problem for 40 years, probably longer. But, the downtown Needham simply doesn't have, most buildings, I don't mean most, I mean the vast majority of buildings don't have the parking, the off-street parking ability. And that's a big problem. The town has to get more realistic about it. Yes, back to my first statement, which is you need parking or people aren't going to go and shop in a particular area. I guess the first problem to solve is to get storefronts filled. Second problem to solve is to not torture customers that want to come in and facilitate so that they can survive. So that's the problem. One other thing too, and I think Adam Convars mentioned this too. The concept of use is really changing. I just put in a dentist in a storefront in Belmont, and a pediatric dentist, and in Belmont, it was, let's put it this way, it was 50-50 whether they were going to require us to go for a special permit, depending on how they came down on evaluating the use table. The use table should be, in my opinion, very broad. Obviously you don't want to have uses that you consider to be, really negative, but beyond that, micromanaging what uses you want there at any given time, 5 years down the road is going to be out of date. And I'm not suggesting that I know any better. What I'm suggesting is I don't know, where things are going to go. Again, I don't want my prospective tenants having to go in front of, these endless boards to get special permits, for uses that, are not unreasonable,
That what Gary said on the lever of, PEX Fitness in downtown Needham, that's in Boylston Properties building, Bill McQuillan's building. There's really no parking there, and we had to go through that process, Gary, with regard to, it took us a long time to get the permit. We had a landlord that was willing to play ball and go along that road, but a lot of landlords can't or don't want to carry the building for that period of time. But at the
Adam,
end of
how
the
long
day,
was that? How long was the landlord carrying that while you went
I
through
mean,
the
that land, I
investment
mean,
process?
it's a different landlord, but I think it took us 90 days to get our permit.
That, and that's fast.
And that's fast, but that's too long.
I agree.
And that's too long. And, you know, I think also there's an uncertainty. We have another deal going on. This is a sale of a building, and it, you know, same thing. We can't get a handle on the use, and our buyer can't commit to buying the. It's an end user can't commit to the deal until they know they're going to get their use. So everyone's sort of taking a risk here. If we could somehow streamline the process or get a very clear indication early on, it would increase the speed and velocity of a lot of these transactions, and
There's a-
also cut down the barriers.
There's a period of time that in commercial real estate that landlords give tenants as a free rent period. Is that intended to be, is that period, which can range depending on the property and the landlord and the tenant and the use, is that typically a requirement for permitting for either common vitricular
It could be multiple things. I mean, it could be multiple things. I mean, free rent or abated rent could be in lieu of what you would call like tenant improvement allowance. A lot of times it depends on the condition of a space. A lot of times a landlord is contributing towards the build out of a space. The condition of the space could be so raw that it's really not leasable. I mean, there's multiple elements that go into a free rent and how you sort of categorize it. I mean, it could be free rent for permitting or entitlement, as you said, entitlement. It could be a free rent in lieu of landlord cutting a check for improvements. So it could be viewed in a lot of different ways.
And Block, there's two different types of free rent, one could argue, right? One is the time period when the tenant gets its permits, et cetera, and typically landlords provide no rent obligation while they're gathering what they need to open. And like, for instance, at Linear, we don't charge or ask for rent until the tenant opens, as long as they proceed with diligence in an orderly manner. And we have clauses that require them with timeframes to do certain things when they apply for their permit. So that's sort of, I don't really call that free rent. That's, we're not going to charge you rent until you can operate within reasonable parameters. And then secondarily, there's what I do call free rent, which we don't really typically give. We approach it differently, which is once you're open, do you have an obligation, to pay rent? So one other point I just want to make, Adam, is you asked about trends. And what's fascinating is towns, because they've been hit so hard by COVID, and this happened in 2009, and for us old timers, it happened in 89. I mean, every 10 years there's a severe downturn. And I remember specifically sitting with selectmen in 2009, Wellesley, and now again recently, towns that were very non-responsive, difficult, extremely difficult to work with, now have religion because they're scared of what's happened with the downtown. And they should be, they should be scared, because if the town makes it difficult, there's only so many strikes a batter could take before they strike out. And so one trend that's clear, which I think is, to Gary's point, which I think is extremely welcome, is that towns now, many towns in wealthy areas that were traditionally in high demand, are becoming much more flexible in terms of meeting the needs of the landlord and the tenant to get, again, this sort of robust, active, spaces filled, so to speak. That's a trend that I think is very welcome and long overdue. One wonders whether we'll stick around when we achieve stability again. But that's a good trend, at least over the last 12 months. That's a silver lining from COVID.
I think that this is a topic in itself, dealing with regulatory burden, and how do we accommodate? I apologize. How do we accommodate a legitimate municipal purpose on the one hand, and on the other hand, don't hold up business, which can be a problem, as we're hearing, both for the someone like Tina, who's a merchant who's trying to open a business and stay in business, and if it takes 30 days, if it takes 3 months to 6 months in order just to get a permit. Then after they have the permit, it can take a couple of more months to fashion a space, so to speak. And then, before they're able to start, that could be almost close to 10 months of effective, no rent for, no income for the property owner. And the property owner also has potentially, debt obligations on that property. And it can be a clear problem. So further in our discussion, we definitely want to identify some of these types of challenges and discuss as well some of the opportunities to improve. And we'll probably follow up this conversation with conversations offline to understand more specific examples, because we would definitely like to be in a position to make recommendations to the select board on ways to improve the permitting process here in town, so that it becomes a competitive advantage, as opposed to what I think I'm hearing everybody say is that it is a competitive disadvantage in our
Yeah,
market.
sorry, I was just gonna say, and one other point is that if the goal of the town, and I think it should be, if the goal of the town is to encourage and foster the smaller retailers, the local retailers, the mom and pops, to really do well, the amount of capital they can allocate to a long, drawn out, expensive permitting process, I agree with Gary, can be a non-starter. It can really hinder. So, it's the nationals who can afford or capitalize to have that longer time period of permitting. But I would like to think that a town would want mom and pops. I think that's a really fun, important representation the town would want. And the permitting process with a long drawn out process can literally be a non-starter for mom and pops. So they get scared of it. They don't have the money. And so it's another argument for really trying to simplify the process.
Agreed.
Yeah.
So now I'd like to talk a little bit about, our competitiveness. Gary, you own properties in multiple markets. What are some comparable towns? What towns does Needham compete with?
Well, of course, it competes with Needham, with Wellesley and Newton. Those are the two closest towns where I have some experience. On a regulatory basis, I think they're all equally as difficult to deal with in many respects. They just happen to be higher end towns that draw, people with more money, and probably more dollars per foot can be done. We don't have to compete with Wellesley and Newton. One of the Needham advantages that's become pretty clear is a lot of people pass through Needham on their way to, as example, Dover and south. And I think the restaurant subgroup benefits pretty well by that. Restaurants aren't my favorite tenant, but basically, tenants vote with their feet, and I probably have more restaurant in my space in Needham than any other area I know that I own. Restaurants, and again, restaurants are very expensive to set up. In the town of Needham, involve really the most time and the most committees. They have to go in front of the planning board, the health department, and then eventually the select board as well. It's crazy, actually, what it has to go through, and that seems to be, the most demand for space seems to be for food. And I think the town could, as I said before, could come up with what I would call safe harbor provisions, which is just another way of saying, check off these 5 boxes and, proceed to the health department. And, cut the amount of time getting approval down from, 4 to 6 months down to a month, like a normal retail space.
What's interesting, Gary, as you're talking, is that is that the demand for restaurants has increased, even though it's a heavily regulated and time-consuming process.
Yeah, I don't know. It baffles me why people want to, put their life savings at risk and do the work they do to open up a restaurant. They always fail, just given enough time. Even legal seafoods fail. It's just given enough time. And
I don't think
yet,
the demand has increased for restaurants. I would argue that that's not right, actually.
So Joel, how would you characterize that?
I would say actually that that's not true. I'd say it's static at best. I think restaurants have come under heavy pressure from multiple fronts. And I think 2019 pre-COVID was actually not a good year for restaurants. I would argue, labor costs have increased materially. Food costs have increased materially. I think if you talk to restaurants, they'll tell you that they're hurting, and we're hurting pre-COVID. COVID was just sort of a final blow, and for a lot of people, I think it's just that, back to my original point, that restaurants are one of the category. They're one of the sort of brighter parts of the response to online. You can't go out to eat online, so I think that they're just a more visible response because they're a category of retailers who can and do effectively compete. And so I think you're going to see increasingly food and beverage be one of the survivors of the online phenomenon. And
COVID helped the best operators, though. I mean, it eliminated the weak. It helped the best operators. The best operators were really savvy about all of the PPP and the funding that was out there. And what you've seen now is a rush on second generation restaurant space. And the rush is from the best of the best, the guys that are well capitalized, the guys with the best concepts. So this COVID actually, in many ways, I think, reinvigorized the restaurant industry, which was in need of change because, as Joel said, in 2019, there were too many seats. All the costs were going up. Regulation was really high. Labor was a major issue. And I think a lot of this, I guess if you want to call it a silver lining, but the result of COVID is that it got rid of a lot of the weak pretender players.
Yeah, and there's recapitalization that's going on in the food industry. But the point I was trying to make on Block was that I think that it would be the wrong conclusion that restaurants are, doing really, really well. I think the right conclusion is that towns should do everything they can to help restaurants because they're under duress. And that's one of the areas where towns can create vibrancy and successfully respond to the online phenomenon. That was the point I was trying to make.
I get that. I didn't mean to suggest that restaurants are thriving clearly.
No, it's a fair point. I'm just trying to be helpful in terms of what towns can do and see that reality. That's all.
I was commenting on the, on the success in Needham pre-pandemic.
Yeah.
Of the number of restaurants in spite of a heavily regulated environment. That's what I.
Well, that's the competitive advantage that Needham has, what you asked about, Adam, because you've got the density and the wealth, and restaurants like that.
So what are some of the other competitive advantages that we have, and what are some of the competitive disadvantages? Clearly transportation, but are people taking mass transit to get into town to service and shop at our stores and restaurants?
Well, I think Gary's point, right? I mean, you're near the highway, cars go through Needham all the time. So if I'm a restaurant and coming home from work, I'm going to hit Needham when I come off of 128. You are near office population. I think Adam's point is well taken. I think you can capture from a food and beverage the morning and evening traffic patterns, whether it be commuter rail or car or whatever, or even dense residential. I think Adam's point is well taken, that if you can somehow amplify the daytime purchasing, then that could help as well. But density, wealth, highway access, transportation hubs, I would argue are the competitive advantages of towns like Needham.
These these good retailers, look at Press Cafe at 300 Needham Street. They have done quite well throughout the pandemic. They're able to deliver. They're good about touchless purchasing. Their numbers are huge as far as sales, but they also attract a daily driver that's there. And so if you are able to attract a tenant like that, Needham's going to get Cookie Monster. Not a lot of people really care, but Joel, they're your tenant in Burlington.
They kill it in Burlington. They're great. I love Cookie
They're going to
Monster.
take over the old juice place. Every high school kid's probably going to gain 5 pounds, but they're going to be in the center of town. We don't have ice cream. It's a youth that's been missing. We have Abbott's, but it's been missing. We have the Junction, but again, a traditional ice cream place has been missing. And I think, uses like that, they're going to, at a certain time of day, they're going to attract a lot of people. People are going to go to the restaurants downtown and then maybe go there at night. But
Adam, to your point about Cookie Monster, their first bricks and mortar was Art Center in Burlington, and they went there first because they wanted the office population.
So what's interesting about this is, and I want to open this up to Bob and to Mike Wilcox and to Adam Meisner. Are you finding that employees either on their way to work but especially midday for lunch, are they typically leaving the office to go into the downtown or another part of Needham for lunch, other than for a typical business lunch when you're schmoozing a colleague or you're trying to sell a product? Or are most businesses looking to keep their employees eating on site so they can be more productive and get more work done during the day? I'm opening that up to Mike and Bob and Adam, and also to Glenn as an employer of a large business as well.
Yeah, I'll jump in, Adam. It depends on the employer. Some of them are very good about bringing food into their people to keep their people there. We have a proprietary app called HQO that sources lunch delivery to our buildings, and it's locally sourced, so it's good for the local economy. And that's one aspect. This, of course, goes back over a year now. And then we have more cafes in the park than we used to. They're repositioning 140 Kendrick Street, the old PTC building. TripAdvisor is going to be multi-tenant. You have Shark Ninja, you have our building at 117 Kendrick. So there are some local options, but I think, the population, the office population wants variety. And, I think they tend to go more towards Needham Street versus Needham Center just because of proximity and variety. But, we've talked in the past about how to strengthen, the Needham connection to the office population.
So interesting.
I think one thing that's important is, as Mike said, they want variety, right? And you can go to, a lot of these buildings have a cafeteria and maybe they're serving different, specials every day, but it still tastes the same. But like at Chapel Bridge, one of the properties that Mike's company is affiliated with, they pre-pandemic did away with the traditional, Rebecca's Cafe or whatever it was before, and opted for a company called Fuda. I'm not sure what if they're still around or not after, what's gone on with the pandemic, but Fuda was literally bringing in a different local vendor every day. So Monday was Mexican, Tuesday was Chinese, Wednesday was, Italian or something like that. So it rotated. And I know like at our office building in Newton Corner, we don't have a cafeteria there, but across the street, they were doing food and we would go, 3 times a week basically, because it would be a totally different, I shouldn't say experience because it's really just, takeout of food, but it's just different flavors and everything. But I know like with the Shark Ninja Cafe, I go there. I don't even work in the building, but it's just, they have, a decent amount of variety there. it's got to be a, cool, fun environment, I think, for, to get people to actually sit there and, enjoy food. I mean, they have TVs and everything like that, and kind of like a lounge. So, yeah, I mean, I know a lot of companies were like catering were, bringing in caterers, but that's, gone away over the last year. And I'm not sure how many of them were able to, survive what happened. So.
Bob, what are you finding with your office tenants? Are the employers encouraging their employees, for those that don't bring their lunch, to go out into the surrounding area for lunch, or are they mostly eating in the building?
I would just say anecdotally that restaurants that are within walking distance are considered to be a strong amenity. We own property on Reservoir Street near Pinellas and Brothers Pizza. I see a lot of traffic over that way, leaving our building, going over there. 140 Gould Street is next to 160 Gould Street, which has a cafeteria inside. So I know a lot of people take advantage of that. And then our other buildings located more towards Needham Center are all within walking distance of a bunch of restaurants. So it's definitely important, no question about it.
That makes sense. Glenn, are you finding that that your sales force, your management force, and your service personnel are typically eating on site, or are they heading down Needham Street for lunch, or into the center of town? What do you find with your employees?
They all do takeout, Adam, and it's either way down Highland, just depending on what they want to do. But they all go out, someone goes for a run for the whole department, comes back with the food. That's what happens.
Got it. Thank you. We've been spending a lot of time talking about food. What do we see are trends with the non-restaurant category, with pure retail? We had heard before about experiential retail. I think one example was, I think it was Barney's in Los Angeles opened up basically a marijuana apparel store, which was, I think, the most expensive high-end type of experience where you could somehow enjoy recreational activities in the store, a very high-end product, and not just talking about specifically the things that may be smoked or vaped or whatever, but or chewed, but that was supposed to be an experiential play. We have on Great Plain that golf store that does offer very much, and I think it's one of the only experiential retail plays in town. Glenn, I see you've got your hand up.
Adam, I have to leave the meeting. I just wanted to let
Okay.
you know.
Thanks
Thank you.
very kindly. Appreciate that. Thank you. So is experiential retail, a trend that's here to stay? What are some of the examples that we see in the marketplace?
I mean, when you speak
Joel
about
and Adam, I have a question for you. This is more coming from a consumer point of view than a professional point of view, but I've always felt that one of Needham's challenges is geographically, we're really at the whole of the donut. We're surrounded, we have incredibly strong retail all around us within 5 to 10 miles in virtually every direction. Legacy Place, University Ave, Needham Street, Chestnut Hill, Wellesley, Natick, Framingham. And really what that does, it kind of creates a vacuum that just, when you're working with national retailers and they start kind of filling out the checkerboard, it seems to me that more often than not, Needham just kind of gets passed over because of that. So is that accurate? And how would that play into Adam Block's question about, trying to attract these kind of newer type of retailers?
I guess I see it a little differently than you. I think that it's interesting, like in Wellesley, we own 2 blocks in Wellesley Center, right across from some of Michael's buildings, I believe. And we stopped trying to compete with the Natick Framingham area because it's kind of what you're talking about, right? That there's a local servicing the local demographic, and then there's trying to service those retailers who have more of a regional draw. And so Wellesley Center really doesn't serve a regional draw. I mean, it sort of does, but not really, you know, and so you increasingly hear, you know, whether it be apparel or really most retailers, yeah, I'm in Framingham, I'm in Natick, that's where I want to be. And I think that's what you're talking about. And so I think that instead of, it's not just Needham, I think that all these communities, instead of trying to market to the destination carters and the regional plays and the regional draws, I just don't think that's really relevant, but I think that's okay. You know, I think that the Needhams and the Newtons and the Wellses of the world, again, should focus on those retailers who want to draw from this wealthy, dense, you know, base. So for me, there are a lot of towns that can't and really shouldn't try to be that regional draw. I mean, I'm not speaking in absolutes, obviously. There's always exceptions and anomalies, but instead of trying or seeing the town that way, I don't think that's relevant. I think it's really more of a enjoy your strategic advantage and don't try to be what you're not. And I think that's, like I said, I think that's true for Newton and Wellesley and Needham and, you know, Burlington, for example, it's not true. It, you know, in the sense that because you have the mall there, right? Dedham has the, you know, Legacy
What Burlington
Place.
struggles with, Burlington has no downtown. So, you know.
Right, and they have a big office pop and they have the mall, but for these sort of, but the thing is, these, I keep on mentioning this, you know, Needham, Newton, and Wellesley in particular have a unique quality that most wealthy communities don't have. They have density. You know, you go to Weston, it's one house per 2 acres. You know, it's great that there's money there, but they don't have the density. So there's a competitive advantage. I mean, my lot size in my house in Newton Center is 1/5 of an acre, and that's the norm. You know, that's 10 wallets per acre, right? If you do the math, you know, whereas in Weston, you might have a half wallet per acre. I mean, that's sort of one way of looking at it, right? So for me, in response to your question, I think it's a great question because I've grappled with this, especially in Wellesley, because for a long time we thought Wellesley was really more of a regional play. And, you know, it can be a little, but increasingly, I think that's not true. I don't think it's a coincidence that the Gap decided to leave Wellesley Center. You know, it's not how the world works today, but we've got a lot of interests to be in Wellesley Center because of the, you know, what Wellesley can and should be. I guess that's how I would answer your question.
Well, right. And I think to your earlier point, I think Needham needs to focus on its strengths and not try to be something that it's not. And I think
yeah, totally agree
that's
with
something
that,
you know, I think that's where we as a town tend to fall short a lot or miss the mark.
Let's focus on that at this time. What are our opportunities? What are our competitive advantages and what are our strengths in the marketplace? What do you see, Adam Convisor?
I mean, Joel said it. A lot of people said it on the call. I mean, Needham has to look in the mirror. We're not a super regional market and we don't want to be. And I think that's the beauty of it. I think that's the strength of it. The strength is we have density, but we could have more density. We have commuter rail. We've got unbelievable access to roadways. We can get into the city when we want. We've got a great school system. We've got the N2 corridor and a great daytime pop office space. I mean, those are the strengths. Build on your strengths. I think we could, you know, again, add some density to the downtown. Recognize that we're going to need some more parking downtown. So maybe that's part of the overall plan in the downtown area. You could take some of these single-story blocks, do maybe some underground parking or parking in the back, and then go vertical, and then allow yourself to have some retail, not fill the entire ground floor with retail, but enough retail where it makes sense for what's in demand, but go with the strengths, you know, and attract tenants because of those strengths. But again, you have to look in the mirror. You know, we're not really competing with other towns. I think you have to recognize who we are, what are the things we like about it, but you also want to keep that community feel, that town feel. And so some of these, you may wish for something that brings you away from who you are. And that would not be a good thing. So I think, again, it comes back to you're not going to attract super regional tenants, but you want to attract a better class of retail. You want to have a good mix, but I think it's about the mix and it's about.
So to that point, one of the things that this committee has talked about before is the success of the Wellesley downtown, the vibrancy and the diversity of different retail, and that's also true with with Dedham Square as well. The tenant mix, is very successful. Joel, you made a very interesting point that the Gap left. I think, is Talbot still there? I think
Talbot's moved. Talbot's went to Federal's property, their old space. Eden's has been trying to lease it. But if you look at Wellesley and say, oh, why does Wellesley do a better job? I mean, Wellesley has had more retail. I mean, they've had more retail. Traditionally, they've had more retail, but they're also struggling too with the shift. There's a lot of retail that's moving over to Linden Place and to Federal's property, and you've got vacancy on the main drag on Central. I mean, Joel can speak to that as well, but one of the advantages, Wellesley, it's got more density, and it has traditionally more retail, and it's got access to Route 9. So those are the strengths that they're playing off.
That's an open question, by the way. Gary, how do you see us in comparison to Wellesley?
Well, Needham could never compete with Wellesley, never. It's a different class of, well, class is the wrong word. It's a different, it's a much wealthier group of people. You got Wellesley College right in the downtown. So it's always been a downtown that could attract not necessarily nationals, but what I like to refer to as onesie twosies. Relatively high-end retail that could go into that town, go in there and like Concord, and maybe down in the islands and do very well. Needham is a service town. That's what goes in Needham. You're not going to get a real clothing retailer in Needham. You can get a sports store, small one. Maybe not anymore because it's gone so much bigger. I was just thinking about Needham and one of their successes, and there's pluses and minuses about it, but in the residential market, it's unbelievable. As I understand it, there's 70 tear downs of houses per year in the town, which get replaced by $1 million plus mini mansions. I know that's not everybody's taste. It's not necessarily mine either. My uncle, who he and I basically ran all the real estate for all these years in Needham. He had a house right around the corner from the high school. He had two 10,000 square foot lots. From when he passed to when his adult children had that property sold to a developer, and two houses were in the ground and built within 8 months. It was unbelievable. And that kind of thing right now is transforming the town. And that's going to have major implications, certainly in the next number of years, because these are all $1.5 million to $2 million and up housing. And it is going to change the nature of the town. There is no doubt, absolutely no doubt. It's still not going to turn Needham Center into what Wellesley Square has traditionally been. And even Wellesley Square, it's been noted earlier, is under a lot of pressure right now. They got some work cut out for them too.
Well, that's a very interesting point, Gary, because with us we have Tina, who runs a high-end retail clothing boutique in Needham Center. And Tina, I'd like to ask you to jump in here with what your experience has been, and and what you've really seen as in the market here.
Well, my shop is a little bit of an anomaly because I would say close to 90% of my business is done online. So my target market is in Los Angeles and Manhattan. And we're very expensive. I mean, I can't afford to shop in my own store. You know, the average price point per item on apparel is hovering around $350. The reason why I opened here is because I kind of grew out of my house. We could no longer run the e-com business out of the house. And so the real estate market was affordable enough. I used to have a shop on Newbury Street years ago, that it made sense to develop this brick and mortar channel to help support the business. And while it certainly has exceeded my expectations, because I agree with Gary, this is a very sort of service oriented town, and it's a very different socioeconomic demographic than Wellesley or Newton. And I'm very familiar with Wellesley as well, because I went to Wellesley College. I am moving the shop to Newton Highlands in about a month.
Well, there you go. And what's your expectation about the difference in the demographic and the difference in the market? What pushes the move?
Well, Lincoln Street is it's a very charming little street. So the variety is there. It's also a lot of complementary businesses. So there's a high-end French pastry shop that opened up recently. There's a high-end chocolate and nut store that just opened up recently. The salons across the street, actually good friends of mine own one of the salons there. So that's going to help feed traffic to us. Again, high-end. So the complementary businesses are there, and it's the length of Lincoln Street is such that everything is very condensed. So it makes it very walkable, and people will spend time there to get their hair done, to go get lunch, to do some shopping, and then maybe go get a drink at Buttonwood afterward, or go to O'Hara's.
So you're actually hitting on a very interesting point, where we want these destination businesses to feed business to other shops across the street or next door. And do you find, for instance, that Sweet Basil customers are, or had been going across the street and shopping, or people, afterwards going to Abbott's and then going across the street to your shop? Were you getting that kind of?
No, and I'm very familiar with the businesses that are still here, because we just work really closely with one another, and particularly during the pandemic, because I have the online experience. I helped quite a few businesses try to get up and running online, which is ridiculous, because it's essentially a completely different business model. You can't just throw a few $100s at your Facebook page or your Instagram account and expect that you're going to be able to survive on kind of putting up very random postings and expect your business to survive. So what we're going to see now, because I am the only clothing store left, is that it's going to be primarily consignment shops and gift stores. And now all these little gift stores are starting to sort of go at it, because they're carrying the same type of product, they're carrying the same line, they're carrying the same price point. Needham is very, very price sensitive. So if you hit a certain threshold per item, you'll have a difficult time moving that product. And again, I just know this not only from being in the business here, but just from talking to all of my colleagues that run other stores here. So there isn't much, I don't know, collaboration. I think there is within the business community. I think there is somewhat within the small retail community. And honestly, the retail community suffered here more so than the restaurants. I can think of one restaurant that went out. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, 3 Square did not survive this pandemic. And again, I think Adam C. had mentioned that,
they were going out before though.
Yeah,
exactly. The pandemic has, I've learned what I can live without. So, I don't have to go to New York 6 or 7 times a year anymore for buying trips. Send me the email. That's cool. I don't have to sit on Yesella for, 2.5 hours and have crappy Wi-Fi.
What you said struck a chord, and we've done a lot of the leasing, as you know, in Newton Highlands. And I think you notice this, apparel tenants like to be around other apparel tenants that have similar customer profiles, and people cross shop. And then as you said, Tina, you go to one place and then you plan a day of it, or you plan a few hours out. It's a velocity thing. I think Needham is on the climb, but it's going to take 3 or 4 key tenants to change that dynamic. But it's not just the ground floor tenants. It's, again, we talk about this density. If we had the density, Newton Highlands has density. It has a total different type of density. And it also has a history, that particular trade area has a history, and it has velocity. It's already up to speed. Needham has got to do some things on the base level in order to get there. And it's not like you can snap your fingers. It may take 10 years.
Such as?
Again, it's a density thing. It's attracting the right tenants. It could take those 2 or 3 key tenants to turn it. It's not going to be one tenant. It's going to be 2 or 3, and then there'll be a trend, and then they'll attract other ones. But it's not just the tenants that are going to do that. It's going to be, it's really all encompassing. It's going to be the vertical density, bringing people down, the parking. I think it's timing, right? You've got more and more of these, it's the change of the residential that's there. So all of these things will change that, but it may take time. I think we're 10 years away from that area of downtown Needham, that Great Plain area. We're probably 10 years away from that looking a little bit closer to what Central or maybe the Highlands look like.
Another point that Tina mentioned.
I got to sign off, but thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Joel,
Bob.
Adam, and Gary, thanks for joining us.
Another point
care,
that
everyone.
Tina
Bye-bye.
made that I thought was very interesting is, she mentioned that it's a relatively small, condensed area that's very cute, and I agree with that characterization. I actually do like in Newton Center. That's my walk. I walk right down Lincoln Street, and I do it for exactly the reason, Tina, you just said. And so, if you look at Wellesley Center, it's kind of a similar concept. It's a smaller, condensed area that's got big sidewalks and street lamps and landscaping, and it's a human scale, and it's a fairly small area, and it's just a pleasant place to go for a walk. We have a bookstore in our block in Wellesley. It's not a coincidence that they want to be there versus being in Linden Square. I mean, it's a cute, fun experience. You get your ice cream, you have dinner, you go for a walk. It's and I think that I was listening, my ears perked up, when you said Newton Highlands, because I think, Needham Center, it feels less cute, if you will, and more sort of, thoroughfare-ish, if you will.
Yeah.
And so, Tina, I really agree with everything you said. As a consumer, I love the villages, a lot of the villages in Newton. I'm drawn to exactly what you described. So, Adam Block, what Needham could do is maybe consider trying to create a physical environment for at least part of Needham Center. And I don't know what that means physically, but look at trying to create that sort of a more intimate, pedestrian friendly, less windswept sort of, cuter, if you will. I'm using that in a positive way, not a pejorative way, sort of environment to be, and then you bring in people like Tina and some upscale restaurants, and all of a sudden it's a place to be. It's kind of what do you want to do this Saturday afternoon? Well, let's go to Wellesley Center and walk around, get some ice cream, and have some dinner. Okay, that sounds pretty good to me. I mean, at Newton Highlands, I go to Newton Highlands because it's a fun. I get my coffee. So Needham Center has less. It's not the feeling I experience when I'm in Needham Center. So
Gary, you've owned property, for multiple generations, I think, in our town center. And that's exactly, I think, what we would like to see, Joel's vision here. What do you see as things that we can do to help foster that kind of vibrancy and tenant mix?
Well, I think you have a much greater chance of getting good food and beauty than you do high-end retail. That's already a trend that's in the mix. Retailers are voting with their feet, and that's what they see as the opportunity is food and beauty and other things as well. But if I mean, that would be the precursor step anyway towards what you just mentioned. I don't know. Could it potentially happen? Is this trend in the residential mix now going to turn this into something more like Wellesley Center, I have my doubts. I'd love to see it happen. Obviously, I'll benefit. If the opportunity presents itself, we're going to go that way. But no, and by the way, in terms of Needham redoing itself, they just spent quite a bit of money downtown in front of the town hall and that whole area with, beautification. And it looks nice. Is it as pedestrian friendly as Wellesley Square? I don't know. I'm not sure how much that matters. I do know that my 3 adult children all live in Wellesley, and they do come to Needham to dine. So, I would say that is a trend that's going Needham's way.
It's interesting, Gary, you say that, because I think part of that streetscape project that the town embarked on at a sizable expense was designed to help create a more pedestrian feel. I think a lot of people, I can't remember, Gary, if you talked about it, that Great Plain has a tendency of being a thoroughfare. People don't stop and shop, and it's not pedestrian friendly. So that's, I think, something that we'd like to look at and talk about as we continue this discussion over time. Does anyone else have any other final closing comments or recommendations or observations?
I'll start, I guess. First of all, Adam, Joel, and Gary, thanks so much for participating in this. This is just the kind of feedback and direction that I think we really needed. I think one of the and Adam, I've been beating this drum for years and years that we need to have a strong residential component. Needham needs it anyway for the empty nesters, but a strong residential component who would require less parking than commercial office in the downtown area, and who could do the daytime kind of activities to support those tenants. The other thing about Needham that I think that seems to be a little bit different than other areas is that the retail spaces are so tiny compared to other areas that and Adam Conviser, I'd like to hear your opinion on this. It may affect actually the kind of tenant that we can actually get. It just seems that they're a smaller scale. The storefronts are a smaller scale than you see in other downtown areas.
Yep. I know of one particular, it happens to be a food guy, but would attract a lot of other people that wants to get into Needham, but we don't have the footprint for them and the parking related to the footprint.
Yeah.
And it's a type of tenant that I think Tina would take note of, because it would attract a lot of other people. So yeah, I mean, I would agree. We don't have, but it goes along with the parking too. You need, if you're going to have the square footage, you need the parking.
Yeah. The thing is, and we made strides through our committee to do this, is there is parking in Needham. People just don't know where it is. You know what I'm saying?
I
Like
100% agree. I've never not been able to park when I wanted to park. I don't understand. There's just always parking.
I mean, if you compare Needham Center to Newton Highlands, we have way more parking than Newton Highlands, but it's just not obvious. And people coming in don't know where to park. They don't know to park behind Cook. They don't know to park behind the CVS because it's just not obvious. And we went through a whole process of getting signage up. You can park here. And I think that is an issue. There's a lack of an education of being able to instruct people where they can easily park.
Joel, any final thoughts?
No, it's a really interesting dialogue, and I think that a lot of towns face similar challenges. I think the good news for Needham is that there's lots of really positive fundamentals that are available. So I think that you can do really good things because you're starting with a lot of really positive qualities. I mean, if tomorrow morning a property became available to buy in Needham Center, I'd be very interested. I don't, as a landlord, Needham is very desirable. But I do think that there are steps one can take that we've discussed today that can materially enhance the desirability of the center. I guess that would be my sort of closing statement.
That's helpful. And Gary, do you have any final closing guidance?
I would agree with Joel. I think there's some fundamentals that are really getting much better. I think this trend in the residential market, I've already mentioned it once. I think this is a huge trend, if we're patient and don't try to be who we're not, we can keep the center filled. If we could ease up on some of the regulations, that would be great. And that's it. I don't think we need radical change here at all.
I think this has been a fantastic discussion. I'm so grateful that you were able to participate with us today for 90 minutes. Lastly, before anyone goes, does anyone else have any other questions from our subcommittee? Doesn't look like we have any. I really would like to thank Gary, Joel, and Adam for devoting so much time for us today and to contributing some important suggestions and feedback and observations. Understanding your experiences, I think, will help inform some of the change that we'd like to see that can drive a positive result for town and to strengthen our retail segment in town. Thank you all very much for coming. And we may reach out again offline to follow up on a couple of these themes for perhaps some additional specific suggestions if you have. We're grateful for the time that you took today. And thank you all very much. Thank you for your investment and dedication, into the town. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks, Adam.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks,
Take care,
Adam.
everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Adam, do you have to close the meeting in any special way?
Oh, I suppose I could take a vote to adjourn. Would you like to, well, Virginia's still here. You want to make a motion to adjourn?
I move we adjourn.
Thank you, Virginia. Rick, do you want to second that motion?
I second it.
Excellent. Thank you very much. We have any discussion? Hearing none, we'll come to the vote. All in favor of adjournment, please say aye.
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 And the chair is aye. We are adjourned. Thank you very much. Appreciate your help, everybody. And Rick, again, thanks for coordinating this and being able to extend those relationships and to help us here today. That was very, very helpful.
Happy to do it. Thanks.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys.
All right. Have a good day. Bye.